The following episode contains material that may be harmful or traumatizing to some audiences, including discussion of sexual assault. Listener discretion is advised.
At the age of 18, I moved to New York and established a place to live and, had a very small circle of people that I knew, friends. I had found an apartment in Spanish Harlem and found a job at a place called a coffee shop in Union Square.
It was 2004. Kiki Doe was living on her own in Manhattan when a stranger approached her.
I was working one day and a young, attractive woman walked into the coffee shop and I was standing at the hostess stand and she said, "Wow, you're really beautiful. What's your name?" It was just an odd way to introduce oneself to a person, a total stranger. And so I was really pretty taken aback by that. She just started to tell me about this man that she worked for, a wealthy client she had. He was very well connected and she could tell that I was a model and he had ties to the fashion industry and all these things. I had a break, so she was like, "Can you step outside and can we talk, for a little bit?" And so I went out and talked to her and she started telling me about how he likes to have attractive women give him massages at his house. And he lives in this amazing mansion in the city. And she had known him for a long time and worked for him for a long time. And they were really good friends. And she was telling me how amazing this guy was and how much she trusted him and how much he had done for her. And he could do the same for me.
As someone who had traveled the world and seen a lot as a model, the proposition seemed like an opportunity for Kiki to make some much-needed cash.
It was something like $300 for 30 minutes or even more than that. At that point, I was like, okay, well, I was struggling financially, of course. I was working in a coffee shop and New York is incredibly expensive. And I was like, wow, I could really use that money. I mean, I was living on ramen. So I said, okay, I'll think about it, And so I gave her my number.
The two young women hit it off almost immediately.
She took me out and we had dinner and went to a place to have drinks and she covered everything and just was really trying to become my friend very quickly and trying to entrust herself and have me trust her, in which I did because I had no reason not to trust her in my mind. She was really nice. She wanted to befriend me and she wanted to help me out. Never in my mind did it occur to me, like, why is this total stranger trying to help me so badly? Looking back, why didn't I ever think this is not a good person, it's not a good situation? It just never occurred to me. She was not so different from me and she was young and she was attractive. Unfortunately, in our society, that lends someone credibility when it shouldn't necessarily. And also that was kind of the world that I was living in. The modeling industry, everything's based on your looks. And so I'm sure that had some kind of influence, my perception of her.
But what Kiki didn't realize is that her new friend was part of a sophisticated network that would ultimately uncover child prostitution, sex trafficking, and the sexual assault of countless young victims, all who've suffered at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein and his co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell.
Epstein allegedly abused dozens of minors at his homes in Manhattan and Palm Beach, Florida. He enlisted girls to recruit other minors to his trafficking ring, and prosecutors said they seized scores of photos of full or partially nude girls.
Kiki's attorney, Lisa Bloom.
If Jeffrey Epstein, at whatever age he was then, had walked in, it would have been very different. But he was so manipulative to have Ghislaine Maxwell at the top of the pyramid and then a series of younger women go out and recruit. So of course a woman is going to trust another woman, especially her age, much more so than like a middle-aged man coming in out of nowhere. This is the insidious nature of the network that he created.
Kiki shares her deeply personal story. It can be difficult to hear and even more difficult to tell.
This is really hard to retell. I have like a visceral reaction to just the idea that I have to walk through this again.
So Kiki, I'm going to give you full permission. If that's not something you want to do, just tell me.
I want to, just for the sake of your audience, to give them context about this. I'll glaze over the illicit parts that I don't enjoy talking about.
With Kiki's best interest in mind, I also invited both her attorney, Lisa Bloom, and her therapist, Dr. Janice Stevenson, to participate in the conversation and offer their support. From Cast Media, this is Media Circus, an inside look at private tragedy in the public eye. I take high-profile crimes you might think you know and connect you with the real people behind the media coverage to share their stories, in their own words, on their own terms. I'm Kim Goldman. Born in Texas, Kiki Doe, the name she uses to protect her anonymity, was a little girl when her father joined the service.
I had a pretty unconventional childhood. My father joined the military when I was about 6 years old, and we moved to Germany for about 9 years. My parents were both artists. My dad was a combat photographer in the military. My mom was a school teacher. We traveled a lot, which was amazing. And then we moved to California, where I started modeling at the age of 14. I was not a fan of high school and actually eventually dropped out of high school because of my modeling career, which was a lot more exciting than going to high school and offered me a lot more opportunity and education in the real world than high school did. I actually told my parents that if they didn't let me drop out halfway through my junior year that I would run away. So eventually they capitulated and they let me do independent studies so that I could travel for my career. That sort of set the pace for my young adulthood.
While Kiki was seeing success as a model, she still saw herself as shy and self-conscious.
There's sort of a dichotomy there because I don't know how I was able to actually model. And it's funny that I was even interested in it because I was so shy. But I think it allowed me to kind of step outside of my own self, my own personality, and become someone else. You know, it was kind of a fantasy, I guess.
A fantasy life with plenty of love and support along the way.
My parents were so very protective of us our whole childhood, so we really never had anything bad happen to us, and they were very cautious about others, making sure that we were always safe in safe places and safe situations, so I was very trusting.
A trust that carried over into her young adulthood. Here's Kiki's therapist, Dr. Janice Stevenson.
I think all the time Kiki was doing modeling, she had her mother with her, so she was meeting strangers, but she was protected. She was going to all these amazing places, but she was sheltered. So trusting people who seemed similar would not be odd at all. Therefore, there was no indicator to signal alarms for her. We've dissected this numerous times. There was no red flag to say, alert, alert, alert of any kind that we've been able to find so far.
At 18, Kiki left California for a life on her own in New York, a move she had dreamed of making for years.
I think I was 13, and I remember stepping foot in that city, and just like as soon as we got into the city, I remember saying to myself, I'm going to live here one day. There was something about it that was so magical. So I knew that as soon as I was out of high school, I was going to New York. I was going to move there. Whatever I had to do, it was going to happen.
It was there that Kiki met the young woman who befriended her that day in the coffee shop. She saw no red flags until she did.
I think the one instance that I can look back and think that I did see a red flag, I was in too deep already. I had gone out with her and we had sort of become friends at that point, and she was sharing personal information and, you know, everything that you do to gain someone's trust, right? So she set up the appointment and she said, okay, everything's good. Meet me around the corner from this address, gave me the address to his mansion. And I met her early that afternoon at like a deli or bodega or something down the street. I think it was to check me out to see how I looked before I went in. And she said, just make sure that if your age comes up, you don't say you're older than 17 or 18. I did at the time think that was really strange. But, you know, at that point, I was already like, I just need to get this over with. I've committed to it. I can't get out of it now. I'll disappoint her if I say I can't go through with it, right? And God forbid I disappoint someone. That would be like the ultimate shameful thing for me, and just being a people pleaser.
Her decision was made. She felt there was no turning back. On that day in 2004, Kiki arrived at the front door of Jeffrey Epstein's mansion.
The maid answers the door and she takes me up to the second floor into this small dark room with a massage table in the middle of it. There was a bathroom. I still remember all the details, all the people and the photos that he had. A lot of photos of himself meeting people like dignitaries and well-known people. I kind of just sat there in silence and was trying to figure out what was going to happen. I was just so incredibly nervous. I had never been in a situation like that before. I didn't know what to expect. But by all accounts, this was a super nice guy, a professional, very successful man. He was friends with presidents, and all of the images that I was seeing of him proved that. This seems legitimate. There are all these photos of him with famous people. This must be okay. And then a few moments later, he walks in with a robe and says hi, and he goes into the bathroom, and then he comes out with a towel wrapped around his lower half.
While Kiki began to give him a massage, everything changed in the blink of an eye.
It went from just a very awkward massage to a sexual assault. It's almost like there was no transition. It just happened. He was so used to doing it that there was no time where I could even process what was happening. That's when he sexually assaulted me. A few minutes later, he handed me the money, and then the maid walked in and led me out of the house.
Immediately after that traumatic event, Kiki's world began to fall apart.
I had a complete mental break. I got fired from my job. I couldn't function. I couldn't leave my apartment. And then I ended up calling my mom and dad to come get me because I couldn't be there anymore. I didn't even tell my roommate. I just had my parents come get me, and I just had to move my stuff out, and I just couldn't stay there anymore. They brought me home, and I just kind of turned into a recluse. I just couldn't really function. I needed something to distract me, so I signed up for school, and I started taking some classes where I just kind of shut everyone out, and I just wanted to refocus my mind on anything that could distract me other than what had happened. And so, yeah, slowly but surely I sort of tried to get back to normal, but being in therapy has made me realize how much that event has informed the last 16, 17 years of my life and continues to do so.
Kiki.
Uh-huh.
Take a breath. Take a breath. You did real good. Just keep breathing. You're not there anymore. You're here now. And you're very safe.
Sorry.
There's no sorry. You came with a purpose, which is to help others not go through that. And you just told the whole story. And that was very brave. It's hard to have adrenaline surge and deep breathing at the same time. One more. Good.
I can only imagine what that experience is for you to have to live. And I appreciate you trusting us to share that. If I could have you just pause for 1 second, I want to ask Dr. Stevenson, how does this impact a 19-year-old, their development, their ability to connect, trust?
The thing that makes it trauma is that it's life-threatening and life-altering. So from that perspective, the age is irrelevant because your spirit, your soul knows that you could die and that you're different after that. And for Kiki, you heard her describe, she had a mental breakdown. Now, there's no part of the brain that breaks, but there is part of the brain that stops thinking. It's stuck there. You've done something that you don't recognize as yourself, and so you're stuck.
In the months and years that followed, Kiki struggled to cope.
The way in which Kiki coped with this was to withdraw and to avoid life. She was stuck in that trap of avoidance all the way through school, all the way up until we started working together. And at least the first year of our work was spent navigating her out of that trap that she was in from the day that it occurred. She was still actively in that trap. That's not at all unusual. People tend to cope with avoidance. The mind cannot take it in. The mind doesn't understand it. It's trying to figure out, wait, what just happened? Wait, why did that happen? Wait a minute, I don't understand this. Wait, what's going on? And it stops. It just stops on that question. And it keeps repeating it and trying to find answers to it. And so until you walk through it enough, until you find answers for it, you're stuck there.
What about the concept that your body holds on to trauma?
It does. You see some of it in how she's retelling it. She has to still push her way through it to say it. Kiki's methods for withdrawal and Kiki's methods for avoidance are woven into the fabric of who she is. So every session, I'm listening for where in her daily walk is she trying to avoid? Where is she trying to withdraw? Where is she trying to not face? Because now, after 16, 17 years, it's habitual. We actually call them Epstein moments. You're having an Epstein moment. Again, I'm so tired of that. It needs to stop. And we dissect it and we unbundle it so she can see where she had choices, because the experience of the event is that there was no choice.
I actually was going to ask you, Kiki, how you refer to your abuser. I think that's really important for people to understand. So hearing Dr. Stevenson say you had an Epstein moment, is that where you put him in your mind?
Oh, God, I've never had that question before. I've never really thought about that, but I guess that is how we refer to him. In a way, it kind of detaches the fact that he was a person, kind of dehumanizes him a little bit by referring to him as a moment or a thing, more like a thing that happens to me instead of an effect from him or something, if that makes any sense.
His Rolodex of friends also includes Britain's Prince Andrew, former President Bill Clinton, and President Donald Trump,
Did you know how big of an influence he was?
I had a limited view of it from my experience with him, and I only saw the full picture when I saw the breaking news and that he was arrested at the New Jersey airport. I had no idea the extent of what he was doing, which is why I never told anyone until I saw that he was arrested and I heard stories from other victims. It was the same exact thing that happened to me.
She wasn't aware of his, quote, power, unquote, in the society or in the world. But the moment that the event occurred, he assumed a power in her head that took her voice away. And it took her adventure, her safety in navigating this world that she had previously embraced with fun and joy. She surrendered that to him. He took that from her that second. And so in session, the other way we refer to him is he's not allowed to win. He does not get to keep that power.
It's important to me that we focus on Kiki in this episode, her story and her healing journey. But it's also important to understand the level of power and corruption that not only led to Kiki's experience, but that of what is said to be hundreds, if not more, of young girls and women whose lives were absolutely devastated by this man. The first report, made in 1996, over 25 years ago.
She was the first known accuser to alert law enforcement to Epstein. She reported the assault to the FBI, but she told us it wasn't for another decade, just before Epstein's first arrest in 2006, that an agent finally appeared at her door.
From 2002 to 2005, Epstein ran a sex trafficking enterprise, luring dozens of girls, some as young as 14, to his New York City and Palm Beach, Florida homes. He would pay them hundreds of dollars to give him massages, and then the physical contact would escalate into sex acts. Epstein would allegedly pay even more money for the girls to recruit other possible victims.
This is someone who had multiple places where he could conduct his terrible sexual activity with children.
Finally, Jeffrey Epstein was charged.
Epstein pleaded guilty to procuring a minor for prostitution and solicitation.
At the time, he could have faced life in prison for allegations with underage girls, but the prosecutor in the case, Alex Acosta, now President Trump's labor secretary, struck a more lenient deal.
I don't know that I've ever seen a deal that lenient. Epstein faced 13 months. He ended up serving, and most of it on work release.
Epstein would work at his West Palm Beach office for 12 hours every Friday through Wednesday.
We're very happy that his jail sentence is over and he can begin a new chapter in his life.
It's not until 2018, 9 years after his release, that an expose in the Miami Herald that featured more than 60 women who said they were Epstein victims, that there was new interest in the case.
The FBI expands its own investigation into Epstein's alleged sex trafficking ring. The 66-year-old is accused of sexually abusing dozens of underage girls. His alleged victims continue to demand justice.
In July 2019, Epstein is arrested on federal sex trafficking charges.
In court for the first time this afternoon, wearing a Navy prison jumpsuit and pleading not guilty.
He's now facing up to 45 years in prison on charges that he was running a sex trafficking ring.
Some as young as 14 years old, forcing them to have sex with his powerful friend.
Jurors will also see excerpts from one of Jeffrey Epstein's black books, a collection of contacts that may reveal more victims and more high-profile participants in his sexual misconduct.
We could see other people charged, and we certainly will know who they are.
Do you remember how you felt during that time when he was finally behind bars?
Yeah, it was surreal to have that picture in my mind of him going from such a luxurious lifestyle from his island and his mansions all over the world to being in this filthy prison behind bars was just, it was a lot to process.
1 month later,
officials say multimillionaire Jeffrey Epstein has taken his own life.
Saturday morning at 6:39, the multimillionaire was found hanging inside of his cell.
There are 2 federal investigations into Epstein's suicide and how this happened.
Did you have a visceral reaction to that news?
I was just pure rage that there was such a lapse in just no responsibility in watching him for being such a high profile person, and just the fact that that could happen was just so outrageous. I thought he was so self-absorbed and narcissistic that he wouldn't actually go through with doing something like that.
I think he knew he was going to prison for the rest of his life. And that's why he took his own life.
Do you actually believe he took his own life, Lisa?
That's a really good question. The answer is I don't know. I've looked at this closely. There's 2 prison guards who allegedly both were asleep at the same time. They were accused of negligence. The camera also wasn't working. I mean, there's a lot of strange coincidences. I don't really believe in coincidences.
We have learned that jail guards were supposed to check on him every 30 minutes, but that didn't happen.
And he had had a suicide attempt allegedly 2 weeks before. So why weren't they watching him more closely? I mean, the astounding amount of money this guy had. He left a $500 million estate, and most people think that's really undervalued, that he was a billionaire. When you have that kind of money, people can get paid off. Anything can happen. I think we're never going to know.
Did you want to face him? And did you feel cheated out of that opportunity because he killed himself, or died in prison, I should say?
It would have been nice to have the option. I don't know if I could have done it, though. That's hard to say. Maybe I could have built up the courage to do that along with the other survivors. If we were all together, I probably would have the strength to do that. But yeah, we should have been given that opportunity.
Kiki, you could have done it, and you would have done it, and you would have been magnificent. So I am a voice for women confronting their abusers. Everybody says what Kiki says. I've represented hundreds and hundreds of victims over the years, and I still do. And they all say, there's no way I could see him in court. There's no way. And I say, yes, there is. And of course, it's traumatic. Of course, it's scary. But there's also something that's very empowering about going into a courtroom, sitting on the stand, raising your right hand, telling your story, and you walk out of there a very empowered, strong person. And I just want to say that Kiki is not only incredibly brave, but wise, insightful, really an inspiration to me. I represented 8 women who were abused by Epstein. We know now that there were, I think, 150 ultimately who came forward against his estate, and I'm sure thousands more who were just too terrified to even call an attorney and deal with this. She's the only one of the 8 who I represented who was able to speak publicly, because that's the level of fear. And a lot of the survivors, even after he was dead, were still afraid of him and also his network. I'm not underestimating how hard it is to speak out about sexual trauma or to go into court. I'm not underestimating that at all. But lots of people do it every day. And I think they're almost always really glad that they did.
Looking back, do you wish that you would have filed sooner, acted sooner, reported, done something different?
Of course, because if I had, maybe that would have stopped him from doing this to, who knows, thousands of more young women or girls. I can't carry that with me because I could barely take care of myself. To think that I could have saved all these women is hypothetical. The network that he had was so vast that even if I had reported something, there were tons of legitimate cases against him and he still got away with it.
Girls were reporting Jeffrey Epstein as early as the late 1990s. And law enforcement did nothing. And then in the early 2000s, around the time that Kiki was abused, other girls were reporting him. And by 2008, he ended up getting this sweetheart deal and a year of basically home confinement and 1 day a week in jail. It was shocking what the preferential treatment he got. You know, there's one system of justice for the very wealthy, and then there's one for everybody else. So I can tell you pretty definitively, Kiki, it would not have made a difference if you had reported it at the time. And of course, 100% of the blame lies with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and their enablers. The victims fought for years and years, decades, to try to get some justice, to try to be heard in the criminal justice system where they're supposed to be heard.
Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's associate, was arrested in July 2020.
Prosecutors have used testimony and photos to depict Maxwell and Epstein as a team, coercing and trafficking girls to sexually abuse them.
And just this summer,
the socialite who helped the late financier Jeffrey Epstein sexually abuse underage girls has been sentenced to 20 years in prison.
On the criminal side, it's over against Epstein because he's dead. Ghislaine Maxwell was brought to trial. I was there in New York. I was very, very pleased that she was convicted. Are there any others who might be brought to justice?
Accusers are calling for those who enabled Epstein to be held accountable.
You know, Jean-Luc Brunel was a man in France who had ties to Epstein, also accused of sexual misconduct. He recently killed himself in prison. I mean, just shocking. Are there others in the Epstein network in the U.S.? For example, the recruiter who brought Kiki to Epstein. And there are a lot of other recruiters. Are they going to be brought to justice? I don't know. I think anything is possible.
Do you think that there are misconceptions about sexual assault victims?
The whole victim blaming is a pretty good indicator of that, which is probably why most victims feel like it was their fault, like they did something, as an accomplice to their assault.
The victims in that case were just like victims in any other case. They did things that most people who don't understand sexual assault would think are counterintuitive, like they went back multiple times. By the way, Kiki did not do that, but many of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein did. They went back for years. They were really caught up in this web of this predator. They self-harmed, some of these victims. They had substance abuse and alcohol and drug problems, which is very common for victims. They had all of these things, and yet they still won on the criminal case. And that's what I want people to know, because so many victims will say to me, like, well, I've made mistakes. I've done things wrong. I sent friendly texts afterwards. Psychologists understand that and can explain it. And guess what? Even juries understand that now once they're educated about it. So I think we have a heightened understanding about sexual abuse, and that's good.
According to RAINN.org, out of every 1,000 sexual assaults, 975 perpetrators will walk free, and only 310 of them are even reported. Lisa, do you want to speak to why sexual assault victims don't often report?
We know that sexual assault victims rarely report, and when they do, it's generally many years later. If they do it within a period of months, that's really fast. But that is all exacerbated when the predator is somebody who is very powerful, somebody that they know. So a lot of women and men who are victims take these secrets to their grave, or they come forward 20, 30, 40 years later. It's just very common. They think they'll never be believed. How is a 19-year-old girl working at a coffee shop going to go up against a guy who's got a mansion and pictures of himself with presidents, right? It's just not going to happen. When people say, why didn't you report it? I mean, she may as well have decided, I'm going to go live on Mars. I mean, that was just completely inconceivable.
But according to Lisa, laws in some states are changing for the better.
The laws are changing with regard to the statute of limitations. That's every predator's best friend, the law that gives him a get-out-of-jail-free card if he can just run down the clock. In New York, for example, a law just passed, the Adult Victims Act, which gives 1 year. I don't know why only 1 year, but 1 year for adult victims to bring lawsuits.
The Adult Survivors Act will give those victims a second chance to file lawsuits. It provides a 1-year window in which the state's usual statute of limitations for civil lawsuits will be set aside.
Creating the ability for virtually any victim, regardless of when the sexual abuse took place, to file a lawsuit. Now, this is a big development in New York. Other jurisdictions are doing it as well.
No matter what time you were abused, at any point in your past, if you were a child, go file your cause of action.
Now that's going to start in November and run until November of 2023. But slowly we're chipping away with these laws. And I think eventually there will be no statute of limitations on sexual assault. Why should there be? All that does is block a victim from getting in the courthouse door. If she wants to get into court, she still has to prove her case in the criminal side beyond a reasonable doubt, on the civil side by preponderance of evidence. If she can do that, she should be able to do that. And we should bring people to justice.
It starts with having the courage to speak out.
I think just hearing one of the other victims that had gone through the same thing and seeing her be courageous enough and brave enough to tell her story, it just opened my eyes to think maybe it's okay that I come out and say something, because, well, obviously I'm not the only one. Maybe if I come out, then someone else will come out, and then someone else will come out after that, and have a weight lifted and help put this bastard behind bars. That was sort of the biggest thing, was, wow, he's been arrested, and if I can help him get sent to prison with telling my story and just being one more victim, then I'm going to do that. It was pretty difficult, though, after 15 years of not having really told anyone, to then call Lisa and tell her my story for the first time.
I can only imagine how many women have been positively impacted by Kiki sharing her story, but I can also imagine the pull to keep sharing, even when it feels like too much. Do you feel like you have an obligation? There's a burden for you to speak out and to continue putting yourself out there?
No, I can easily turn things down if I don't want to do them. And if something seems important, then I will participate. But it's not easy. It takes me days before the actual event. Like, for example, this podcast, I'm riddled with anxiety. The level of anxiety is constant and it's permeable. It's not easy to do these things. So while I do feel an obligation, I am learning to say no to certain things if it's going to affect me physically and mentally. It's my way of using my experience and turning it into a positive where I can maybe make some sort of impact or positive change. I don't think it's right to say that because this happened to you, you have to speak out and you have to share your story and to help others. Everyone makes their own choices and what's best for them.
It's a balance between what you need to do for you and what the media wants you to do for them. So I really applaud you for being able to find that balance. What do you wish people knew about this story that the media doesn't tell?
I wish people would take a moment to remember that we're all human beings before they cast judgment or before they make up their mind about something. Just because you're on TV or your story is public, you don't know them personally, so just be kinder to people. Some of the comments and opinions that people have shared, vilifying me and calling me a liar, just all kinds of crazy, really cruel stuff. Just how quick people are to judge and demonize people is scary. I wish people would just take a moment to reconsider doing that.
Do you feel like having it over and over and over again in the media helped, hurt, prohibited you from being able to heal?
The media coverage, I think it did help in the larger context of the story. And I think that the public's interest in the story and their outrage and disgust and just the level of abuse that was going on and the trafficking, I think that definitely helped the case and may have also influenced Ghislaine's case.
One way in which the media overdose of it impacted her is that it allowed her opportunities to relive it. Every time she relived it, she grew up. Every time she got to speak it again, she could grasp more of it. And it actually supported her in a way that would have taken much longer in therapy to grow through this, to realize that she's not the 19-year-old girl. She's not stuck in that door. She's not trapped in that room. She's actually free of that. So it served an unexpected purpose that I think couldn't have been predicted. And we're still navigating it. But I didn't want you to lose that, because the anger that you're hearing is as much the 19-year-old's unspoken, unvoiced, unvented rage as it is the fully grown woman's righteous indignation.
I'm really glad that you made that point, because I was going to assume that there was an element of re-victimization by having it played out on the news over and over again. So it sounds like in a weird way there was some benefit to that, if I could loosely use the word benefit.
In a weird way.
Yeah. I'm glad that Dr. Stevenson brought that up, because I think having the opportunity with Lisa to go on some of these outlets that we went on, that did help me in my healing process, having those opportunities.
She's bravely decided to reveal herself and share her story publicly for the very first time. I want to thank you for being here, Kiki.
Thank you, Dr. Oz.
Lisa,
thank you.
As always.
As hard as it was to get out there and tell my story in front of the world and strangers, it was a way for me to take this horrible experience and sort of maybe turn it into something that was productive or constructive or positive for other people that might feel like they're alone. There were a lot of opportunities where it did help me in my healing process and journey to be able to tell my story and have people support the telling of the story.
You're able to get your power back and your voice back, it sounds like. Having met so many people over the years who have been thrust into the media and the public eye, there is that shift with reclaiming your power and reclaiming your voice using the medium that took it away from the get-go. But Kiki's experience with the media wasn't all positive.
Some of the really disappointing experiences I had with the media was some of the journalism that was happening that I saw across multiple disparate news sources that got so many details of my story wrong that did not help me at all. And it was hard to see because it just felt really disrespectful. And, you know, it would be a short article and they would have gotten like 5 details out of my story completely wrong. And so that was really disappointing to see written journalism be so off, almost like it was written in a couple minutes and then just posted about someone's life. And on very respectable, reputable news sites. That was really disappointing to see and frustrating.
Did that make you want to speak out more and correct the record?
It honestly made me pretty angry. When you're retelling someone's life details as a journalist, you would think you'd want to get them right. And I mean, I told my story many times over. They had more than enough resources and information to get the details right. But yeah, it did make me want to contact the people and say, hey, you know, this is actually wrong. This is wrong too. But, you know, I think that was just too much for me to deal with at the time. And I just had to sort of let it go. It was just kind of shocking.
For Kiki and other victims, speaking out didn't happen until after their abuser was dead.
I think this will make it easier for victims to come forward, and I think it will reduce the fear factor for them.
What's so interesting from a legal perspective is that once Jeffrey Epstein died, all of the victims were free to speak without worrying that they might get sued for defamation. And I think part of the media explosion of interest in this happened around the time of his death because you can't defame a dead person. Many people, they don't want to speak out publicly, and that's fine. That's their choice. I support that. But for those who do, like Kiki, I think there is something very powerful about taking your story back. Sexual abuse is about silencing you. And when you decide on your terms that you're going to tell your story, it can be very empowering.
How do you prepare your clients, especially when they're high profile, to be in the public eye and to navigate the media?
So 98% of my clients never do media. It's always a very personal choice. It's not a requirement at all. If they want to do media, I want them to think about it overnight, hopefully more than one night. I want them to be fully prepared. And all I can do is be very honest. Every single person is going to get mean, nasty, snarky comments in the comments section. I tell my clients, Mother Teresa had haters. That was before social media. Anybody who sticks their neck out. Kim, I mean, what a wonderful person in this world you are. What a great voice for victims. I'm sure you got a lot of it, right? So it just comes with the territory. But when you're experiencing it for the first time and you've never done this before, it can be very painful. I tell my clients, please don't read the comment section. Don't read what people write about you on social media. I got a wave of Twitter hate this week. It doesn't feel good for me after all these years. And I know about it, and I'm pretty tough. But we withstand it, we forge on, and those who speak out and are brave, and those who bring lawsuits and stand up against predators, this is the only way that we're going to make change and make the world a better place for our daughters and our sons.
In August 2019, after Epstein was pronounced dead, Kiki and 7 other victims filed a civil case against his estate.
On the civil side, which is lawsuits for money damages and compensation, that's what I do. That's what I did in Kiki's case and for the 7 others. That's all resolved now. We were able to fight for and win substantial compensation for all 8 of our clients.
Do you have specific thoughts on the concept of justice and what that means?
I feel like justice was done in this case, maybe just not soon enough. But I feel like it was done in this case, thanks to Lisa and all of the survivors that were braver than me and reported it and spoke about it before it was a huge headline. I applaud all of them because that could not have been easy. And they paved the way for everyone else to come out and share their story.
Kiki, from where you are today, what is your life like now?
I'm in a place of transformation and transition. She won a victory for me that is life-changing for the better. And so I'm in the process of moving. We just bought a house. So we have a lot of change going on in our life right now that I think is going to be a new chapter for my family, a positive one. I'm so much stronger than I was a couple years ago and can deal with so much more now than I thought I could ever deal with. I mean, if you told me several years ago that I was going to go on national television and tell my story to the world about how I was sexually assaulted, I would have never believed you. So I've made a lot of progress in the past couple of years. I'm proud of myself.
As for Dr. Stevenson, she continues to support Kiki and others who've experienced unspeakable trauma, and she shares this message.
Anybody can be victimized in this way, not at the degree of organization and system that Epstein put together, but sex abuse occurs from toddler on up to elder. It occurs in any setting where a perpetrator thinks that he or she has an opportunity. The hardest problems to tackle are not being believed. I can't tell you how many clients I have who weren't believed when they tried to have the courage to tell someone. Their mothers didn't believe them, their fathers didn't believe them, their siblings, their family members, their neighbors, their relatives, their teachers, their school administrators, because it couldn't be whatever it was the kids were saying or the adults were saying. How we raise boys is so limiting and it's so sexualized, and it gives them such unwarranted power and permission that it results in a lot of the other problems that the society has. And until we change how we raise boys and how we raise girls, but how we raise boys, this is going to pop itself up as an ugly head in humanity going forward.
As for Lisa Bloom,
to all of the victims out there, you are not alone. You are not to blame. Get yourself a good therapist. As you can see from the remarkable Dr. Stevenson, they are out there. And if you have a legal case, reach out to an attorney sooner rather than later, because these time deadlines will creep up and sometimes stand in the way of people getting justice. But you can do this. And ultimately, this becomes something that just happened to you, but it does not define you. Your choices are what define you. The things that you do in your life. I was a sexual abuse survivor too. You can have a good life. You deserve it. You're entitled to it. And ultimately, that's the best victory. That's the best revenge.
And Kiki's message to others who may have a similar experience.
I'm fully aware of how lucky I am to have the resources that I do. This happened to be a high-profile case. I was able to get an amazing lawyer to represent me. I have an amazing therapist. But there's so many victims that don't have any resources, that don't have anyone to tell or reach out to, don't necessarily have family they trust or money for a therapist or insurance. But there are nonprofits and places out there that can help victims for free and have all these resources to help. And a lot of times it's easier to tell a stranger something like this that has happened to you instead of someone that you're close with. So I would hope that they just know that there are still resources out there.
If you or someone you know is a victim of sexual assault, I will link to resources in the show notes. To my guests today, Lisa Bloom, Dr. Janice Stevenson, and especially the courageous Kiki Doe, I'm honored to share your story and to be even a small part in creating a lasting impact on sexual assault survivors everywhere. Thank you. To continue the conversation, follow me at Kim E. Goldman on social media. Media Circus is a Cast original podcast, executive produced and hosted by me, Kim Goldman. Produced by Jackie McDougall. Harper Carlton is our associate producer.